Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Suich. I'm senior correspondent for politics, technology, and society. And it's my pleasure to be our moderator today for AI at Work in America. How do you unleash the invisible workforce to unlock productivity gains? AI in business is a subject very close to my heart. I wrote a cover story for The Economist a few years ago called AI Spy about how AI was going to transform the workplace and business across the world. And I have several wonderful panelists here to discuss the current state of play. I would like to introduce you to Sujeet Bambawale, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at 7-Eleven, the convenience store company. We have Marcello Damiani, Chief Digital and Operational Excellence Officer for Moderna, the pharmaceutical giant. We have Andrew Lay, or Dr. Andrew Lay, who is Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Buoy Health, which is a health and diagnostics company, and Cathinka Wahlstrom, who is the President and Chief Commercial Officer of Alight, a business process outsourcing company, and was previously at Accenture. All of you, thank you so much for taking time for this conversation on a very interesting subject. I'd like to start by asking all of you for a very practical example. I think AI is so often in the realm of theory and generality. So I'd love to anchor the conversation in a practical example from each of your experiences and companies of how AI has been used to enhance productivity gains. And Sujeet, could I start with you?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Alexandra. I appreciate the introduction and to be a part of this illustrious panel of folks. Artificial intelligence is very important to the scale of information security because the scale of the security problem is such that threat actors do not keep any schedule. They are global in nature, and their incentivization or their ROI model is very much skewed away from what can be handled by the standard human team. This makes it perfect for elastic automation and intelligent elastic automation, which manifests best into technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning. To specifically answer your question, a lot of technologies relating to correlation of log data so that we are weeding out false positives and putting together multiple log sources to create one specific risk narrative that will give us an indicator about whether this is an anomaly that we're chasing, this is a threat actor that we're chasing, or this is something else that is completely new but has a risk context. That is where we have a lot of technologies that use AI. Clearly, AI is not a silver bullet or a magic bullet, but I'm very happy to see that multiple security technologies are now leveraging artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning together to make lives easier for security analyst teams and security operations teams so that they can chase the right concerns and not waste their time chasing everything.
Thank you. And just a quick follow up on that. Are these tools that you are buying from vendors, or are these ones that you have built internally at 7-Eleven?
Currently, these are tools that we are procuring, and AI is a part of tools that we have procured from outside. It will give us the runway and it will give us the ramp up knowledge so that we can, over time, build our own internal data models. But as all things, one size doesn't fit all. So it's very important for us to see the outcomes through things that we have procured so that we can start customizing them even further and talk about and have that very informed conversation about if we were to build, what would we build?
Okay, thank you. Cathinka, can I turn to you? What is an example from your own firm?
Yeah, so I'm going to take a bit of a human capital lens here. We are a cloud-based provider of integrated human capital solutions, and we believe we're in an employee-driven economy right now for years, companies have been measured on how they treat clients, which is understandable, and that will continue to happen. But we also think that a lot of companies will be measured on how they engage with employees and how they treat employees. So how does that fit in with our discussion on AI? Well, when it comes to productivity gains with AI in the human capital world, I would focus on two examples. One is insights, and the other one is experience. So when I talk about insights, we serve tens of millions of employees and their families every day across health, wealth, and well-being. And what we are delivering would not be possible without the investments that we've made in AI to harness vast amounts of data, to connect the dots, to get insights, to help employers and employees alike to make the best investment decisions and the best health decisions for their families and for themselves at really critical moments in their lives. The other example would be experience, how AI can really help you give a more personal experience. So we are all conditioned by how we get personal experiences in our everyday life when we interact with technology. HR hasn't been at the forefront of that, and we want to be at the forefront of that to provide that personal experience to engage better with employees.
Excellent. And on your first example, could you give a concrete example of how AI would direct people to employees or employers to a specific investment or choice?
Right. So, for example, you might think that you need back surgery. So, understanding more about what you have been through, your health profile, we can help you guide you through that decision. So, do you need surgery or do you need another treatment? How do we help you find the best doctors to get there, to help you to get back to work quickly? So these are really important decisions. And that's why I say at the moments that matter, these really are moments that matter.
Excellent. Thank you. Andrew, it sounds like that's a problem set that you are also dealing with. Could you talk a little bit about how you built your tools and an example of a use case?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to build off of what Cathinka was saying and thinking also about, how what we offer to other employers, we also use ourselves. And the main problem that we're solving is when someone gets sick, they suddenly have to become both a clinical expert like a doctor and an insurance expert to understand what part of healthcare they should be going to. And what ends up happening is people just Google it and they kind of shotgun into healthcare. And from an efficiency perspective, that's very cost inefficient. If you went to the emergency room when you shouldn't have, when you got back surgery, as another example, when you shouldn't have. But it's also time inefficient, taking days off of work to go to your doctor when this could have been resolved virtually, or again, like an overnight stay at the emergency room to have an issue resolved is just an inefficient use of one's time and resources. And so what we built was an AI program that talks to you like a doctor. And it's fed off of thousands of clinical papers that we read by hand, but now tens of millions of patients who have used Buoy. And what that does for our own employees, but also for the millions of people that we serve, is it helps them understand that it fills that knowledge gap using AI, such that someone can make a much more time and cost efficient decision for themselves, for their loved ones, in a moment of a lot of fear and uncertainty, which again currently is being filled by reading some content and kind of guessing as to what to do.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you. And last but not least, Marcello, please, if you don't mind, share with us an example of how Moderna has used AI for prevention of resilience.
Yeah, of course. And Alexandra, just to say, Moderna is not a pharmaceutical giant. We were a startup just a couple of years back, and we've been making huge progress. And we are now with the COVID vaccine as our first actually product. So from an AI standpoint, I think our main goal with AI actually is to improve quality, accelerate learning, and help our scale up. And I think efficiency for us is just a plus. If I give you one example, is maybe in how in our research environment we automated the quality control of our DNA template. DNA is the first step in our process to produce messenger RNA. So what we've done is we built an automated data analysis pipeline using an existing AI algorithm. And we used an existing algorithm because we didn't have data when we started this. This was a few years back. And afterwards, we started identifying some small improvements that needs to happen to this algorithm. And we extended this and started using our own neural networks and machine learning, looking at convolutional neural networks that were used in the imaging detection to really do the analysis. That was a huge improvement on the quality side. But as we were collecting data and training this network and so on, we finally decided that we're going to build from the ground up a radically new algorithm to achieve even better quality. And this is what we've done. And the problem we were trying to resolve here was very tedious for a human being. We had lots of people in our quality control teams looking at a very difficult area to understand whether something pass or fail. So it was like finding a needle in a haystack, which was very difficult for a human eye to detect, but very obvious for an algorithm once it's trained appropriately. So this is really where we used one example on where we used AI in our sector.
That's very interesting. Thank you. On the gigantism, I guess, is all in the eye of the beholder. But I think with $126 billion dollar market cap, one might say giant. But in any case, quickly moving on. I think we've they're kind of twin benefits that you both have identified with AI. One is on the corporate level, and another is on the employee level. That this will very much change the experience of what it's like to be an employee. So, on the employee level, I'd love to stick with that thread. I mean, how, if we were having this conversation in 3 or 5 years, do you think AI will change the experience of being an employee at a company? Whether that's increased monitoring, whether it's personalization, the path to make more informed decision making and the like. Will we see major changes? And maybe Cathinka, could I start with you there?
Sure. If we think back even to, I'm sure the panels that we all did a few years ago, AI being very heartless, and that was the connotation. There was a lot of fear, and I think we have to reflect on the fact that that has changed a lot over the last 3 years. And any survey you look at, and any company, really, more than half of employees, and at some companies for sure, the large majority are actually supportive of AI. So this discussion has come a long way in the last several years. So I think more and more what we're going to see is that there's this comfort that AI actually helps us be more human, not less human. I wouldn't go as far as to say AI will be treated as an employee, but very much a tool for employees. And I think that fear factor is starting to go away, and it comes from many different reasons. I think the discussions have been helpful, and you hear a lot about the need to explain AI, and I think we're going to continue to see that. But from an employee lens, I think what we see right now is that it's largely welcomed. something that will actually help us provide more value to our customers, but also to our employees. So I think it's fascinating to think about 5 years from now, but I also think we should look at where we were 5 years ago.
And have the rest of you, I mean, COVID has provided such a disruption in terms of the way that people work. Have you all rolled out any new AI-based solutions when it comes to kind of employee productivity tools, or anything of the like, AI fueled or not? Just curious about the rest of you, your experience. Marcello, would you like to?
I mean, in our case, for the moment, we're focusing our AI mainly on problems that are related to our science or to our manufacturing or products. We have looked at some AI and human resources as well, but I think we didn't explore it deeply yet.
And why is it? Is it just that the gains are so much greater?
So I think we need. I think one thing that we need to look at when you look at AI, especially when it comes to human resources, whether it's, for example, you can use AI in performance management or in recruitment and in all those areas, but we need to be careful as well with the biases within AI and how you manage this and how you train appropriately your algorithms. Because I think the data sets that you have, the training that you have, all those are very important. And if you want to do it, you need to do it right, and you want to make sure that you're making the right training for your algorithm. And I think that's one of the reasons. I don't think it's not because you can't do it. It's just we want to do it the right way.
Mm-hmm.
Just to build on that. Sorry, Alexandra. I just wanted to say, just to build on that, totally agree with Marcello, what you're saying. And thinking about the training data and the effect of COVID, I mean, for Buoy, we went from an in-office culture to being now fully remote. And the amount of data that is now quantified because we are remote that previously was never quantified. I mean, a really simple example is now Google Calendar just released a feature that quantifies the amount of time you're in one-on-one meetings versus group meetings. There's no AI involved. That's just a pure quantification, right? But with that data, I could imagine over the next few years seeing the effect of that come out with new features that are AI driven off of the data that we have now been collecting, because we have completely moved our work life, into the cloud, which is really exciting.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Sujeet, did you want to weigh in on this? I mean, I think this question is really interesting about if one is buying solutions from an outside vendor, kind of how much insight and transparency one has into the development of those algorithms. But, if you wanted to take that or another thread of this conversation.
For security technologies, anything that we look at, anything that we test, anything that we even think about deploying goes through very intensive and very extensive testing. It's very important to measure many times before you cut. And I think in woodworking, it's measure twice, cut once. And in any technology of this scale, this caliber, and really this strength, it's very important to pragmatically consider all of the options. Marcello made a very good point about biases. Andrew made a very good point about the productivity and utilitarianism of these technologies. Are there good points of this? Absolutely. Are there concerns that people have raised through the development of these technologies and how they have been modeled, how they have been created, and how they are learning? Yes. So it's a very pragmatic, thoughtful decision, something that I do not take lightly. And anything that's been procured, if it is not transparent to us in terms of deployment, and I speak only about security, not about employee data, in the context of information security. If it's being used, if AI is being used, then our testing will show exactly how it's being used, what insights it's delivering, how it's helping the human side of the team, and how it's helping the security problem. If those results, if those deliverables, if those outputs are not tangible, not measurable, and not accretive to the roadmap, then we will move on to a different technology.
Mhm. Thank you. In our prep for this panel, we were exchanging ideas about some of the other barriers to deploying these technologies. And Marcello, you laid out three. One was, I think, concerns about ethics and AI. But could you lay out the other two for us that are top of mind for you?
Yeah, of course. I think I see three of them. Actually, bias, I don't see it as a concern. I see it as just something that we need to take into account and work on it diligently. I think why I see on our side is really have actionable use cases. If you look at it, those are hard to find, and you need to understand the problems that you are solving, and work with the users or with the community that you're trying to help. In our case, how we address this is we're building an AI academy. First, we want to demystify AI for all users. So at least when users talk about AI, they understand what we mean by AI. And this will help actually with identifying those actionable use cases. Not every use case should be a moonshot exercise because it's difficult. You have plenty of small problems that can be solved in AI, and this is something that we are trying to put in place. I think the second piece is really having a rich data set with labeling contextualized, so you can use to train your AI models. We focus at Moderna heavily on digitization to be able to collect the data so we can use it in our AI model. And I think the last piece I would talk about is really around deployment of AI. Sometimes it's very easy to build models in a curated data set, but the real world is very noisy, and you need to make sure that your model, when it moves into production, works as well as in a curated data set. And we work a lot on how we build the infrastructure to make sure that this is happening. So for me, those are the three areas where I see some of the barriers to get more and more AI implemented.
Yeah, no, excellent. I think that's a very helpful framing. Cathinka, did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to build on that, and exactly what Marcello said about how to look at bias and also how decisions are made. I think the other question to ask is, why do so many companies feel like they're not making more progress faster? And I think a lot of companies get started with very small point solutions as opposed to thinking about it more holistically. And it's also about focus. And so I wanted to underscore the point that you made about use cases. I think it's really finding those actionable use cases. But I do think a lot of organizations give up. They do a pilot. It doesn't go quite the way they want to. They're not really thinking about it holistically. So I do think that there's much, much more to come. And a lot of companies are frustrated at this point that they're not making more progress faster.
And how, Andrew, how big an issue is talent and finding the right people to work on these tools and strategies?
And I think it's a big challenge. Going back to the idea or the point of needing, very specific use cases and solving them with AI. Similarly, you need very specific skills for the problem that you're trying to solve as an organization. And, up until, let's say, 5-6 years ago, there weren't very standardized academic training paths for folks to go into, AI, machine learning, data science, and And so, where we ended up looking was into the academic halls of the physics department, as an example. But that was really just from, talking to folks in the industry and figuring that out, that, hey, learning about physics as an academic actually sets you up really well to be a boots on the ground data scientist or machine learning expert in an organization like ours. Obviously, as the field has expanded, you've seen a lot of different skill sets transition into data science and AI. So I think the market has started to move in the direction of meeting the demand, but I think the demand is still insatiable in many ways and far outpaces the supply. So not only is it hard to look for the specific skill set you're looking for, the competition level is just extremely high, and it's definitely an employee's market right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just a quick point on that, Alexandra. I really think we need to use AI to find AI experts. And, one use case in that is when you look at employee referrals, for example, and I'm sure we've seen this in all our companies, how come some people again and again are able to refer exceptional candidates that end up being really successful and others are not. So if you take an AI lens on those attributes that make employee referrals, for example, successful. So it's what I'm thinking about a lot. How do we use AI actually on finding these really hard to get AI skills?
How do you, there's firms that try and use AI to craft better job descriptions. I've spoken to a few of those firms. It's a great quip. Practically speaking, how will one and how will the market solve for that?
You're asking me? Or all of us?
Yeah.
I do think AI, but I think everyone touched obviously on that you have to be thoughtful about how you use AI when it comes to hiring people. Bias, all of that is very true. But I think that it's something actually that a lot of companies are doing, and it is one of those very actionable use cases. I would also highlight learning and development to make that much more personalized. AI can be really fantastic for that as well. So I think that there are a lot of actionable use cases in this space.
Interesting. It's been a question for you, Sujeet. It's been a very interesting thing to watch between how people who are tech experts think about deploying AI in their organizations versus how CEOs and boards either think about it or don't in some cases, or feel pressure from public shareholders and then come forward and say we need an AI solution without necessarily knowing which problem they are trying to resolve. From your experience, how has COVID changed the conversation, or has the conversation around AI internally on a corporate level with the board or with the CEO changed in the last year or two from your experience?
Business leaders always look at value to the stakeholder, value to the customer. And I think that's the right way to approach it. Artificial intelligence, in simple words, is intelligent elastic automation. Things that learn from all of your business variances and encompass them for the next iteration so that you can make things smarter and faster. Whether it is cheaper or not, we'll be able to determine that only after a long time frame. Any technology at the very start, because of the talent involved in making it work the way you want it to, and then weeding out all the kinks, so to speak, will be expensive at the start. So, from a business leader perspective, it's always about business outcomes and how can we serve our community better? How can we serve our customer better? How can we build more quality into the output? How can we embrace all the variances of the customer journey and about the landscape out there and make it a well thought about pragmatic output? Now, to answer your question, the technologist will see this in a slightly different lens. The execution lens of this will be how to amass the right data sets and how to create that one rich data set for all of these platforms, all of these vectors, all of these surfaces that need to be touched, need to be assessed especially the ones that deal with experience. I heard mention of insight and experience earlier on this panel, which I fully agree with. Those are hard things to quantify and are hard things to ingest because they come from a lot of contextual, lot of temporal, and lot of environmental factors that are hard to really put into data as observations or just things that you write down. They come from a big data set looked at by different ways by different people from diverse backgrounds and so on and so forth to bring their own lens to it. So the technologist will look at it in terms of how can I pull together the right threads at scale and at the velocity of innovation. Business leaders will look at how to serve the community best, how to serve the customer best, and how to craft an output that matches the velocity of growth. These are not orthogonal in any way. I think the velocity of innovation is the velocity of growth in many cases, but they're looking at slightly different pieces of the puzzle. And has COVID changed this, altered this, accelerated this? I think COVID has been a very interesting experience. It has been an experience of adversity for many, and we should respect that. I think it has been a very poor experience for those who have had medical issues, who have lost loved ones, and so on and so forth. And then there are others who have been thrown into the perfect storm of productivity, in which they are at their computers 24/7, whether they liked it or not, whether they're just at their homes. They've seen that their 2-hour commute and 3-hour commutes have dropped off, and they have reused that time and pushed it into productivity. So whether this has been accelerated by COVID or whether this has been received any shot in the arm because of COVID, I think, well, assuming that people have had time to think about this outside of all the adversity that they have faced during the times of COVID, I think that it's hard to say. It's hard to say because people have been spending a lot of times at their desks, at their computers. Perhaps they've had a bit more time to think about this, but I also again have to respect that their mind and their time may have been taken up by other much more pressing medical issues.
Okay. We are unfortunately running down to the wire in terms of time, but I wanted to end this discussion by asking you, which seems fitting for a conversation about AI, to look to the future. And so if we were to be having this conversation 5 years from now, or if you were to predict the the company 5 years from now, what will be different at corporations or in the lives of employees than is different today when it comes to AI's use for and I'll expand it for productivity or otherwise. Andrew, can I start with you?
Sure. I will say my prediction is probably not going to be that exciting, but I think a lot of roles that are currently manual in nature with growing data sets will start to be fully automated in a way that fewer people will be able to do a larger amount of work. So I think there's going to be continued extreme productivity gains from the collection and usage of data.
Okay, thank you. Marcello.
Yeah, so I mean, I fully agree with Andrew. I think the discussion will be the interplay between AI and human intelligence, actually, because AI is great and repeatable processes, identifying patterns, but the humans are much better at synthesis, at creativity. So I think the discussion is what task will we give to people and what task will go into AI maybe 5 years into the future. Those will be the discussions that we will be having. And I think more and more any repeatable task, easy to do by a machine, better than a human, will be going to the machine. And people will be focusing more on the creative side, the synthesis side that the machine has difficulty achieving in many cases. But I believe as well that will be improving. So we'll see where we stand in 5 years.
Well, same time, same place, 5 years from now. We'll see.
Okay.
Sujeet, please. What is your prediction?
I think there will be a bigger expectation of customization. There is a lot of customization that's been pushed into technologies all around us through one or more forms of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and deep learning. Our smartphones tend to recognize where we want to go. They make suggestions of whom we want to call. Uh, and all of these are things that we have now accepted into our lives. They correct the names of people that we routinely reach out to. And as these expectations grow, as these experiences grow with things that we do on a regular basis, our expectation 5 years from now would be, well, that's just foundational. If I'm doing this on a regular basis, the machines that I'm using to assist me on a regular basis should understand what I want to do and should make suggestions, insightful suggestions, data driven suggestions about a repetitive task and should offer intelligent methods of doing it faster. So I think the repetitiveness of any task will be shifted to AI more and more so in 5 years. And I think our expectations from machines will be that they recognize it and they offer suggestions on how to accelerate it and make it better.
Thank you. And Cathinka.
Yes, I think we will be sitting here talking about it as less of a new technology, something that is established. Perhaps the panel won't even be called AI. I totally agree with Andrew that it will help offload a lot of repetitive admin tasks, what everyone has said. I do think that there's a huge positive aspect of this too, and that is that it will help create more human connections because we will be more focused on value added tasks and more creative tasks. So I will be, I'm curious to see what the panel will be called 5 years from now.
Well, I like ending with a dose of optimism. I think that's quite fun. So because I think when we think about the future of work, that is not always the prevailing mood. So thank you, Cathinka. Thank you all for your very interesting opinions. And I will look forward to the sequel, hopefully even sooner than 5 years from now. But thank you all for your time. And thank to the audience. Thank you for watching and thinking about these interesting issues.